The morning sun cast long shadows across the Coronado training compound as Sarah Chun stepped off the transport bus. At 5'4" and 120 pounds, she drew immediate stares from the cluster of SEAL candidates already gathered near the equipment shed. Their eyes tracked her movement with the kind of skeptical assessment usually reserved for obvious mistakes. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez emerged from the training building, clipboard in hand, his weathered face scanning the new arrivals. His gaze stopped on Sarah, lingered for a moment, then shifted to the muscular frame of the candidate beside her. When he looked back at Sarah, his expression had settled into something between confusion and mild irritation. 20 yards away, Instructor Martinez was already taking bets. His voice carried across the morning air with casual certainty. $20, she doesn't make it past the first PT test. Hell, I give her 2 hours before she requests a transfer back to whatever desk job she came from. The other candidates around him chuckled, their arms crossed as they sized up the competition. One of them, a broad-shouldered former Marine named Davidson, shook his head slowly. "Look at her gear," he muttered to his neighbor. "Brand new everything. Probably never been in real training before." Rodriguez approached the group, his boots crunching on the gravel. "All right, listen up. I want formation in 5 minutes for initial assessment." He gestured towards Sarah without looking directly at her. "Chun, you sure you're in the right place? This isn't the administrative building." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Chief." The response drew more skeptical glances from the surrounding candidates. Martinez walked over, his instructor badge catching the sunlight. "Ma'am, with respect, SEAL training has specific physical requirements. Most women who attempt this program wash out during Hell Week. Actually, all of them do." Before Sarah could respond, Chief Rodriguez consulted his clipboard again. "Says here you've got prior service. What was your MLS?" "Intelligence analyst," she replied. Martinez and Rodriguez exchanged a look that spoke volumes. "An intelligence analyst?" "Of course." Martinez turned back to the other candidates. "All right, everyone grab your gear. We'll start with a little run to see what we're working with." As the group moved toward the starting line, Sarah could hear the whispered conversations around her. "She looks like she weighs about as much as my rucksack. This is going to be painful to watch. I wonder if they have a medic standing by." The doubt wasn't just in their words. It was in the way they positioned themselves ahead of her in formation, assuming she'll fall behind. It was in the sideways glances and barely concealed smirks. It was in the way Martinez positioned himself, where he could keep an eye on what he clearly expected to be the first dropout. Speaking of expectations, I have to ask, where are you watching this from? Are you in a state where people understand what real training looks like? Or are you somewhere where they think boot camp is just what they show in movies? Because what you're about to see is going to change how you think about assumptions. Rodriguez blew his whistle, the sharp sound cutting through the morning air. The run began, and Sarah fell into pace with the group, her breathing steady and controlled while conversations continued around her about how long she might last. The 5-mile run ended at the obstacle course, where a new instructor waited with the kind of smile that promised pain. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stood 6 feet tall with arms that looked like they could bend steel, his SEAL trident gleaming on his chest. He watched the candidates file in, his attention immediately drawn to Sarah as she maintained position in the middle of the pack. "Not bad for a warm-up," Hayes announced. "Now we see what you're really made of." He gestured toward the obstacle course that stretched across 200 yards of sand and steel. "This is where we separate the pretenders from the contenders." Davidson finished the run barely breathing hard and jogged up beside Martinez. $5, says she doesn't make it over the first wall, he whispered, loud enough for several others to hear. Martinez shook his head. "That's sucker money. She won't even attempt it. Watch her find an excuse to sit this one out." Hayes began explaining the course requirements, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen hundreds of candidates fail at this exact spot. "The rope climb is mandatory. The wall traverse requires upper body strength most of you don't have yet. And that cargo net at the end has sent plenty of tough guys to the medical tent." Sarah stepped forward to examine the first obstacle, a 12-foot wooden wall that required candidates to pull themselves up and over without assistance. Several of the male candidates were already positioning themselves for the first attempt, their confidence evident in their casual stretching and loud strategizing. Chief Rodriguez appeared beside Hayes, clipboard ready. "Sir, should we modify the course standards for Chun?" Most training programs adjust the requirements when they have female participants. Hayes looked at Sarah, then back at Rodriguez. "Did anyone modify the standards for the last candidate who looked different from the rest?" "No, sir, but then we proceed as normal, Chief." Hayes turned to address the group. "Everyone runs the same course. Everyone meets the same standards. Everyone gets the same respect when they earn it." The emphasis on earn it wasn't lost on anyone. Sarah could see it in the way the other candidates glanced at her, their expressions mixing curiosity with certainty that this would be a short demonstration. Thompson, a former Army Ranger with forearms like tree trunks, slapped Davidson on the shoulder. $20, she asked for help halfway through the rope climb. "You guys are all thinking too small," interjected Peters, another massive candidate. "I say she doesn't even attempt the rope climb. Claims she pulled something during the wall." The betting continued as Hayes called for the first group to begin. Sarah found herself assigned to the third wave, which gave her time to observe the techniques other candidates used. More importantly, it gave the instructors and candidates more time to voice their expectations about her performance. Martinez walked over to where she stood watching. "Chun, you seem calm for someone about to face their first real test. You sure you don't want to bow out gracefully? No shame in recognizing when something is beyond your capability." Sarah continued studying the course layout. "What makes you think this is my first real test?" The question caught Martinez off guard for a moment. "Well, intelligence analysis isn't exactly known for its physical demands." Hayes blew his whistle for the second group to begin. As candidates attacked the obstacles with varying degrees of success, the commentary around Sarah continued. She could hear phrases like dead weight and liability drifting from different conversations. The pattern was becoming clear. Every instructor and candidate had already decided what she could and couldn't do. Rodriguez approached with a stopwatch. "Chun, when you attempt this course, I want you to remember that there is no shame in recognizing your limitations. We have medical personnel standing by, and there are other Navy positions that might be a better fit for your skill set." Sarah turned to face him directly. "Chief, what if I told you my limitations might not be what you think they are?" The question hung in the air as Hayes called for the third group. Sarah moved toward the starting line, aware that every eye on the training ground was now focused on her. The conversations had stopped, the betting had concluded, and every person present was about to witness something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about assumptions. The obstacle course timer started with a sharp beep that cut through the morning air. Sarah approached the first wall with measured steps, while 20 pairs of eyes tracked her movement. The 12-foot barrier loomed ahead, its wooden surface worn smooth by thousands of previous attempts. She reached the wall and paused for exactly 2 seconds, her hands finding purchase on the rough edges. Then she moved with a fluid efficiency that made the climb look effortless, up and over in one continuous motion, landing silently on the other side while the observers behind her fell quiet. Martinez checked his stopwatch and frowned. That was fast. Hayes stepped closer to the course perimeter. "Rodriguez, what was her time on the wall?" 15 seconds, sir." Rodriguez consulted his clipboard, then looked back at the course. Most candidates take 30 to 45 seconds on their first attempt. Sarah was already halfway through the rope climb, her technique precise and economical. No wasted motion, no struggling, just steady progress upward while the betting conversations behind her died away entirely. Davidson nudged Thompson. "She moves like she has done this before." The cargo net presented the next challenge, a 30-foot expanse of rope and steel that required candidates to traverse horizontally while hanging beneath it. Sarah approached it without hesitation, swinging underneath and moving hand over hand with the kind of rhythm that spoke of extensive training. Peter stopped talking mid-sentence. "Where did she learn to move like that?" Hayes crossed his arms, his instructor mask slipping slightly as genuine curiosity replaced routine evaluation. Chun is moving through this course like she designed it. The rope swing came next, requiring candidates to grab a hanging rope and swing across a 12-foot pit filled with sand. Sarah timed her approach perfectly, caught the rope at its optimal point, and cleared the pit with room to spare. The landing was controlled, balanced, professional. Martinez looked at his stopwatch again. "Sir, she is currently running the fastest time of the day." The final obstacle was a wall traverse that required candidates to move laterally across a 20-foot section while maintaining their grip on small handholds. Most candidates struggled with the grip strength required. Sarah moved across it like she was walking on level ground. She dropped down from the final obstacle and jogged to the finish line, barely breathing hard. The timer showed a course record. Hayes approached slowly, his expression unreadable. "Chun, where exactly did you serve as an intelligence analyst?" Before Sarah could answer, Rodriguez interrupted. "Sir, there might be some mistake in her file. That performance suggests significantly more physical training than a typical analyst position would provide." Sarah wiped sand from her hands. "My file is accurate, Chief." "Then you mind explaining how an intelligence analyst runs our obstacle course faster than Rangers and Marines?" Martinez had approached with several other instructors in tow. The question hung in the air while the gathered candidates processed what they had just witnessed. The betting had stopped. The casual dismissal had been replaced by genuine confusion, and every assumption about her capabilities had just been demonstrated as spectacularly wrong. Hayes studied Sarah with the kind of attention usually reserved for puzzles that needed solving. "Chun, I think we need to have a longer conversation about your background." Thompson walked over to Davidson. "Did you see how she moved on that cargo net? That was not beginner technique." Peters joined them. "No way that was her first time on a course like this. That was muscle memory." The instructors gathered around Hayes, their voices lowered but still audible. "Sir, should we review her personnel file more carefully? Something does not add up here." Hayes nodded slowly. "Rodriguez, pull her complete service record. I want to know everything about where she has been and what she has done." Sarah stood quietly while the conversation swirled around her, aware that her performance had created more questions than it had answered. The doubt was still there, but now it was mixed with confusion and the beginning of something that might eventually become respect. The morning sun climbed higher as the next group prepared for their attempt at the course. But the attention remained focused on the small woman who had just redefined everyone's expectations about what was possible. The afternoon brought weapons training, and with it a new instructor who had not witnessed the morning's obstacle course performance. Master Chief Petty Officer Williams emerged from the armory, carrying a selection of rifles that gleamed under the California sun. His reputation preceded him. 22 years of service, 3 combat deployments, and a training record that had broken more than a few overconfident candidates. Williams surveyed the assembled group with the kind of methodical assessment that missed nothing. His gaze settled on Sarah with the same skeptical evaluation she had received all morning, the obstacle course record apparently not having reached his ears yet. "Marksmanship separates the professionals from the pretenders," Williams announced. "Anyone can get lucky with physical fitness. But when lives depend on precision, we find out who really belongs here." The candidates lined up at the firing positions while Williams distributed ammunition and targets. Sarah found herself assigned to Lane 7, between Davidson and a former Marine sniper named Clark, who had been vocal about his expectations for her performance. Clark loaded his magazine with practiced efficiency. "Ma'am, no disrespect, but have you actually fired a rifle before? These weapons have significant recoil, and proper stance requires substantial core strength." Sarah accepted her rifle from Williams and began her inspection routine. The weapon was an M4 carbine, standard issue, familiar in her hands despite the instructor's assumption that it would be foreign territory. Williams walked behind the firing line, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen every possible mistake. "Chun, this weapon weighs 7 pounds loaded. The recoil will test your stance and grip strength. Do not be embarrassed if you need to start with reduced charges." The range safety briefing continued while conversations developed around Sarah's position. She could hear Peters explaining to another candidate why smaller shooters typically struggled with accuracy. Thompson was describing the physics of recoil management and why body weight mattered for stability. Williams called for the first firing exercise, 10 rounds at 50 meters, standing unsupported. Standard qualification required 7 hits in the target zone. Expert level required all 10 rounds in the inner ring. Clark leaned toward Sarah as they prepare to fire. Just focus on hitting the target somewhere. Accuracy comes with experience, and this is probably your first time with live ammunition. The command to commence firing echoed down the range. Sarah settled into her stance, the rifle finding its natural position against her shoulder. Her breathing slowed, her focus narrowed, and she began engaging targets with a rhythm that suggested this was far from her first time behind a weapon. 10 rounds downrange in controlled pairs. Each shot deliberate, measured, professional. Williams walked behind the line with his spotting scope, calling out scores as candidates completed their strings. Clark managed 8 hits in the target zone. Davidson scored 6. Peters achieved 7 hits with 2 in the expert ring. When Williams reached Sarah's target, his spotting scope lingered longer than usual. He lowered the scope, looked at Sarah, then raised it again for a second examination. "Chun," Williams called out, his voice carrying a note of surprise that had not been there during the safety briefing. 10 rounds fired, 10 hits scored. All 10 in the expert ring. The range fell quiet except for the sound of empty brass hitting concrete. Clark stopped loading his next magazine to stare at Sarah's target. Davidson moved closer to confirm what he had heard. Martinez appeared at Williams' shoulder. "Master Chief, what was that score again?" 10 for 10, expert level. Williams was still studying the target through his scope. "Perfect center mass grouping. I have seen active duty snipers shoot worse groups on their first day." Thompson approached from 3 lanes down. "Ma'am, where did you learn to shoot like that?" "That grouping suggests professional training." Sarah began cleaning her rifle with the same methodical precision she had demonstrated throughout the exercise. "I practice when I can." Williams walked over directly. "Chun, that practice clearly involved more than weekend trips to a civilian range. Your stance, grip, breathing control, and target engagement suggest advanced marksmanship training. Professional level." The questions were multiplying faster than the answers. 2 instructors now stood comparing notes, while candidates gathered around to examine the target that had produced a perfect score. The doubt was evolving into something more complex. Confusion mixed with growing respect and an urgent need to understand exactly who Sarah Chun really was. Clark shook his head slowly. That was not beginner's luck. That was muscle memory from serious training. Evening brought hand-to-hand combat training in the gymnasium, where the overhead lights cast harsh shadows across blue mats that had absorbed years of sweat and determination. Instructor Kowalski stood center mat, his massive frame suggesting he had earned his position through more than just technical knowledge. At 6'3" and 240 pounds, he represented the kind of physical challenge that had ended many candidates' dreams. The remaining candidates filed in, their earlier confidence tempered by the day's unexpected revelations about Sarah's capabilities. Still, the whispered conversations continued as they took positions around the map perimeter. "Hand-to-hand combat reveals character," Kowalski announced. "Everything else can be taught, but when it comes down to close quarters, you either have the warrior spirit or you do not." Davidson stretched his shoulders, still processing the perfect marksmanship scores from the afternoon. Physical size matters here, though. This is where technique only takes you so far. Kowalski began pairing candidates for the initial demonstrations. Thompson with Peters, Clark with Rodriguez, Davidson with Martinez. Each pairing designed to test fundamentals while revealing fighting instincts. Sarah found herself without a partner as the initial pairings concluded. Kowalski looked around the room, his gaze settling on her with calculation that suggested he was about to make a point. "Chun, step forward. Since we have an odd number, you can demonstrate with me." The gymnasium fell silent. Several candidates exchanged glances that conveyed their certainty about how this demonstration would conclude. Martinez moved closer to the mat perimeter, his expression mixing concern with curiosity. Kowalski was not just an instructor. He was a former Force Recon Marine with combat experience across 3 deployments. His reputation for ending sparring sessions quickly had become legendary among candidates who had attempted to test their skills against him. "Ma'am," Kowalski said, his tone professional but carrying an undercurrent of certainty, "we will start with basic defensive positions. When you feel uncomfortable or overwhelmed, just tap out. No shame in recognizing when you are outmatched." Sarah stepped onto the mat, her movement fluid and controlled. The size difference was dramatic enough that several candidates moved closer to observe what they expected to be a very brief demonstration. Kowalski circled slowly, his experience evident in the way he maintained distance and position. "Basic grappling first. Try to establish a hold or takedown. I will provide resistance appropriate to your skill level." The engagement began with Kowalski moving forward in what appeared to be a routine demonstration of superior size and strength. Sarah responded with footwork that kept her position optimal while avoiding his initial attempts to establish control. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of the quick conclusion everyone anticipated, Sarah began demonstrating technique that suggested training far beyond basic self-defense. Her movement was economical, precise, and increasingly aggressive. Kowalski's expression shifted from routine instruction to genuine engagement as Sarah successfully avoided his first 3 takedown attempts. The casual demonstration was becoming an actual contest. Davidson leaned toward Thompson. "She moves like she has done this before." Peters noticed something else. "Look at her breathing. Still controlled. She is not even working hard yet." Kowalski increased his intensity, using more of his size and strength advantage. Sarah responded by demonstrating counter techniques that required significant training to execute properly. The gap between her apparent background and her actual capabilities was becoming impossible to ignore. Martinez stepped closer to the mat. "Sir, should we continue this demonstration?" Before Kowalski could respond, Sarah executed a textbook sweep that put the massive instructor on his back with enough force to echo through the gymnasium. The silence that followed was complete. Kowalski rolled to his feet immediately, his professional composure intact, but his expression transformed. "Shin, where exactly did you learn those techniques?" Sarah helped him adjust his uniform. "Cross-training opportunities were available in my previous assignment." The response satisfied no one. Clark approached the mat edge. "Ma'am, that was not basic cross-training. That was advanced combatives from someone with serious martial arts background." Thompson joined the conversation. "The way you moved suggested years of training, not occasional classes." Kowalski studied Sarah with the kind of attention reserved for puzzles that demanded solving. "Chun, those techniques require muscle memory that comes from extensive practice against skilled opponents. That level of proficiency does not develop casually." The questions were accumulating faster than answers, and every demonstration was widening the gap between who Sarah was supposed to be and who she clearly was. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Lieutenant Commander Hayes stood in the briefing room with a folder that had not been there the day before, his expression suggesting he had spent considerable time reviewing its contents. The assembled candidates could sense the shift in atmosphere as they filed in for the day's training schedule. Sarah took her usual position near the back while conversations buzzed around her about the previous day's demonstrations. The doubt had evolved into something more complex, a mixture of confusion and grudging respect that no one quite knew how to process. Hayes opened the folder and consulted several pages before addressing the group. "Yesterday's performance evaluations have raised some interesting questions." Chun, step forward. The request carried enough authority that all side conversations stopped immediately. Sarah moved to the front of the room while 20 pairs of eyes tracked her movement with the kind of attention usually reserved for significant announcements. Hayes held up a single sheet of paper. "Your personnel file lists your previous assignment as Intelligence Analyst, Naval Intelligence Command, Norfolk. Standard desk duty, routine clearance level, no special training noted. He set the paper down and picked up another document. However, your performance yesterday suggests training and experience significantly beyond what would be available in that position. So I made some calls. The room tension increased noticeably. Davidson and Thompson exchanged glances while Martinez shifted position to get a better view of the proceedings. Something significant was about to be revealed. Hayes continued his review. Naval Intelligence Command has no record of Sarah Chun serving in any analyst position. In fact, they have no record of you serving there at all. The silence that followed was complete. Rodriguez stepped forward with his own clipboard, his expression mixing confusion with concern about potential security implications. Sir, if her file contains false information, should we be concerned about? Hayes raised his hand to interrupt. Before anyone jumps to conclusions, I also contacted Naval Special Warfare Command. They were much more helpful. Sarah remained at attention while the revelation built toward its conclusion. The other candidates were beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew was about to change dramatically. Hayes opened a different section of the folder. Naval Special Warfare Command confirms that Petty Officer First Class Sarah Chun completed basic underwater demolition SEAL training 18 months ago. Class 329. Graduated number 2 in her class. The impact was immediate and visible. Davidson's mouth actually opened. Thompson took a step backward. Peter stared at Sarah like he was seeing her for the first time. Hayes was not finished. Furthermore, she completed advanced combat diving, advanced marksmanship, and close quarters combat instructor certification. Her specialized training includes counterterrorism operations and high-value target protection. Martinez found his voice first. Sir, are you saying she is already a SEAL? Hayes consulted the folder again. Not just a SEAL. Her recent assignment was Naval Special Warfare Development Group. That assignment requires additional screening beyond standard SEAL qualification. The room remained silent while the implications processed. Clark finally managed to speak. Ma'am, if you're already qualified, why are you here? Rodriguez stepped forward with a question that had been building since the obstacle course. Sir, why would someone with those qualifications be participating in basic training again? Hayes closed the folder and looked directly at Sarah. Chin, would you care to explain your current assignment? Sarah maintained her position at attention. Sir, I am here as an instructor evaluation specialist. My assignment is to assess training methods and instructor effectiveness by participating as an apparent candidate. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Thompson actually stepped backward while Davidson shook his head in disbelief. Every assumption, every doubt, every dismissive comment had been directed at someone who was more qualified than most of the people making them. Peters managed to ask the question everyone was thinking. So you have been evaluating us while we thought we were evaluating you? Hayes nodded slowly. Chun has been documenting instructor bias, candidate behavior, and training effectiveness. Her apparent inexperience was designed to reveal how assumptions affect evaluation and instruction quality. The implications were staggering. Every dismissive comment, every assumption about her capabilities, every casual bet about her failure had been observed and documented by someone who possessed exactly the qualifications they thought she lacked. The revelation about Sarah's true identity sent shockwaves through the training compound that lasted well into the afternoon. Word spread quickly among instructors who had not been present for the morning briefing, and by evening, the entire training staff was buzzing with discussions about assumptions, evaluations, and the dangerous territory of underestimating people based on appearances. Master Chief Williams was not taking the news well. He stood in the instructor's office with his arms crossed, his face showing the kind of frustration that comes from discovering you have been played by someone you dismissed as incompetent. So let me understand this correctly, Williams said to Hayes. She has been documenting every comment I made about reduced charges and beginner expectations while she outshot half my advanced marksmen. Hayes nodded from behind his desk. Every assumption, every modification you suggested, every piece of advice about starting with basics, all documented in her evaluation report. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway with his own concerns. Sir, what about the other candidates? They have been making comments, and placing bets about her performance for 2 days. How do we handle that situation? The question highlighted a growing problem. The candidates had not just observed Sarah's apparent struggles. They had actively participated in dismissing her capabilities. Now they were discovering that their target had been evaluating their character and judgment the entire time. Kowalski joined the conversation from the hallway. With respect, sir, this whole evaluation setup feels like entrapment. How are we supposed to know she was qualified when her file indicated otherwise? Hayes leaned back in his chair. The point of the evaluation was to see how instructors and candidates respond to someone who appears different from their expectations. The false file was necessary to create authentic reactions. Williams stepped closer to the desk. Sir, some of those reactions are going to be embarrassing when they appear in an official report. Comments were made that assumed she lacked capability based on her appearance. The concern was valid. Sarah's documentation would include every dismissive comment, every assumption about physical limitations, every suggestion that she should consider alternative career paths. The implications for instructor evaluations were significant. Meanwhile, in the candidate barracks, the atmosphere was equally tense. Davidson sat on his bunk staring at the wall, while Thompson paced between the rows of lockers. The knowledge that they had been observed and evaluated by someone they had dismissed was creating a level of self-reflection that was uncomfortable for everyone involved. Peters finally voiced what everyone was thinking. Every comment we made about her washing out, every bet we placed about her performance, she heard all of it and wrote it down. Clark nodded grimly. Worse than that, she was qualified to evaluate whether our comments were justified or just bias. And we failed that evaluation spectacularly. The conversations in the barracks were mixing embarrassment with a growing anger that was looking for a target. Some candidates were beginning to focus their frustration on the deception itself rather than examining their own assumptions. Martinez entered the barracks with an announcement that increased the tension immediately. Tomorrow morning, we continue regular training schedule. Chim will participate as herself, not as an undercover evaluator. All candidates will work with full knowledge of her actual qualifications. Davidson looked up from his bunk. Sir, how are we supposed to train normally when we know she has been documenting our behavior for the past 2 days? The question revealed the core problem. The artificial situation had created real consequences, and now everyone involved had to navigate training relationships that had been fundamentally altered by the revelation. Thompson stopped pacing. Sir, what happens to the evaluation report? Does it affect our standing in the program? Martinez considered the question carefully. The evaluation focuses on instructor methodology and bias patterns. Individual candidate behavior is documented, but the primary purpose is improving training effectiveness. The response provided limited comfort. The knowledge that their assumptions and comments had been professionally evaluated was creating a defensive atmosphere that threatened to undermine the training environment completely. Back in the instructor's office, Hayes was reviewing Sarah's preliminary findings with growing concern. The documentation revealed patterns of assumption and bias that were more extensive than anticipated, and the implications for program improvement were significant, but potentially damaging to current personnel. The experiment had succeeded in revealing authentic reactions to perceived differences in capability. Now everyone involved had to deal with the consequences of what had been revealed. The next morning brought a fundamentally changed dynamic to the training compound. Sarah arrived wearing her actual rank insignia and sealed trident, transforming her from apparent novice to recognized professional in the space of 24 hours. The visual impact was immediate and uncomfortable for everyone who had spent 2 days explaining basics to someone more qualified than themselves. Instructor Martinez gathered the candidates for morning formation, but the usual pre-training banter was noticeably absent. The easy camaraderie that had developed around shared assumptions about Sarah's inexperience had been replaced by an awkward tension that no one quite knew how to address. Davidson avoided eye contact as Sarah took her position in formation. Thompson stared straight ahead with the kind of rigid attention that suggested he was working hard to avoid thinking about recent conversations. Peters shifted uncomfortably, clearly remembering specific comments about her likely performance. Martinez began the morning briefing with forced normalcy. Today we continue advanced combat training. All participants will demonstrate proficiency in close quarters tactics and team coordination exercises. The emphasis on all participants was deliberate, but it highlighted rather than resolved the underlying tension. Sarah was no longer the questionable addition to the group. She was the most qualified person present, and everyone was acutely aware of the reversal. Kowalski emerged from the equipment building carrying gear for the day's exercises. His interaction with Sarah was professionally correct but noticeably stiff, a marked change from his previous casual dismissal of her capabilities. The easy confidence he had displayed when offering to adjust training standards had been replaced by careful formality. Chief Rodriguez approached with the day's training schedule, his clipboard held with the kind of precision that suggested he was overcompensating for previous assumptions. "Chun, you will participate in all exercises at full intensity. No modifications or adjustments." The announcement was intended to restore normal training protocols, but it had the opposite effect. The explicit statement that she would receive no special treatment only emphasized how much special treatment she had been offered when they thought she needed it. Williams joined the group carrying marksmanship equipment, his expression carefully neutral. Today's shooting exercises will test advanced precision skills. All participants will engage targets at extended range with minimal support. The choice of advanced exercises felt deliberate, as if the instructors were attempting to restore their credibility by demonstrating challenges that would test even qualified personnel. But the effect was to create an atmosphere of defensive instruction rather than productive training. Thompson finally broke the uncomfortable silence. "Ma'am, how do we proceed with normal training when the evaluation period is over, but the evaluation report is still being written?" The question highlighted the core problem. The artificial situation had ended, but its consequences were ongoing. Everyone's behavior during the evaluation period was now part of an official record, and that knowledge was affecting every subsequent interaction. Sarah considered the question carefully. The evaluation phase documented initial reactions and assumption patterns. Ongoing behavior demonstrates adaptation and professionalism after receiving new information. Her response suggested that current behavior was also being assessed, which added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. The candidates were now being evaluated on how well they could adjust to discovering their assumptions had been wrong. Clark stepped forward with his own concern. "Ma'am, does the evaluation report include recommendations about individual candidates' suitability for SEAL training?" The question struck at the heart of everyone's anxiety. They had spent 2 days demonstrating bias and poor judgment to someone who was qualified to assess their character and decision-making abilities. The professional implications were potentially severe. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor. The evaluation focuses on training methodology and institutional patterns. Individual behavior is documented as evidence of systemic issues, not personal failings. The distinction provided limited comfort. Being documented as evidence of systemic bias was hardly better than being identified as individually biased, and everyone present understood that their comments and assumptions had revealed character traits that might affect their future evaluations. Peters raised another uncomfortable possibility. If this evaluation technique is effective, will other training programs use similar methods? The prospect of facing future undercover evaluations added yet another dimension to the ongoing tension. The knowledge that any apparently struggling candidate might actually be an evaluator would fundamentally change how people interacted during training. Martinez attempted to redirect focus toward practical concerns. Regardless of evaluation implications, we have training objectives to accomplish. Professional behavior and competent instruction remain our primary responsibilities. But the underlying tension remained unresolved. The experiment had successfully revealed authentic reactions to perceived differences in capability, and now everyone involved had to continue working together while processing the implications of what had been exposed. The tension that had been building since the revelation reached a breaking point during afternoon combat training. Master Chief Williams had designed an exercise specifically intended to test advanced close-quarters tactics, and the artificial courtesy that had dominated the morning was beginning to crack under the pressure of competitive training. Davidson paired with Thompson for the first demonstration, their movements sharp and aggressive in a way that suggested they were working out frustrations through physical action. The exercise required one partner to act as instructor while the other demonstrated defensive techniques, but the roles felt loaded with new significance given recent revelations. Peters and Clark followed with their own demonstration, their techniques competent, but lacking the easy confidence they had displayed before discovering who Sarah really was. Every movement seemed calculated to avoid appearing incompetent in front of someone qualified to evaluate their performance. Then Williams called for the pairing everyone had been anticipating and dreading in equal measure. Chun and Martinez center mat for advanced grappling demonstration. The gymnasium fell silent as the two moved to the center mat. Martinez was a seasoned instructor with 15 years of experience and a reputation for technical excellence. Sarah was a qualified SEAL with advanced combatives training and recent operational experience. The demonstration was about to become something much more significant than routine training. Martinez began with professional courtesy that barely concealed his need to restore credibility after 2 days of offering basic instruction to someone more qualified than himself. "Ma'am, we will demonstrate advanced grappling techniques at full intensity. No adjustments for the evaluation situation." Sarah nodded her agreement while the assembled candidates and instructors formed a circle around the mat. The audience was larger than usual, word having spread that something important was about to happen in the gymnasium. Williams stepped forward with the exercise parameters. This demonstration will test advanced defensive and offensive grappling techniques. Full contact, full intensity, until one participant achieves submission or tactical control. The formal announcement carried weight beyond its words. This was no longer routine training. It was a test of credibility and capability that had become inevitable since the evaluation revelation. Martinez needed to prove he belonged in his instructor position, and Sarah needed to demonstrate that her qualifications were earned rather than administrative. The engagement began with careful circling as both participants assessed technique and strategy. Martinez moved with the confidence of someone who had dominated this mat for years, but his movements carried an edge of desperation that suggested more than professional pride was at stake. Sarah responded with the fluid movement that had characterized all her demonstrations, but now the audience understood they were watching professional-level technique rather than surprising natural ability. Her positioning and timing reflected extensive training and recent combat application. The first exchange was evenly matched, both participants demonstrating advanced technique and tactical awareness. Martinez used his size and strength advantage effectively, while Sarah relied on superior technique and tactical positioning to maintain competitive balance. Thompson leaned toward Davidson. "This is not a demonstration anymore. This is an actual competition." Clark nodded grimly. Martinez needs to win this to maintain any credibility as an instructor, but she has operational experience he lacks. The second exchange escalated in intensity as Martinez pressed his physical advantages more aggressively. His technique remained sound, but his approach became increasingly focused on achieving a dominant position through strength rather than tactical superiority. Sarah adapted by demonstrating techniques that revealed the gap between training and operational application. Her counter-moves were economical, precise, and increasingly aggressive as Martinez pushed the engagement toward a genuine contest of capability. Rodriguez stepped closer to the mat perimeter. "Sir, should we modify the intensity level? This demonstration is becoming quite aggressive." Williams shook his head. Both participants are qualified professionals. They can determine appropriate intensity levels. But the intensity was clearly escalating beyond demonstration parameters. Martinez was now using maximum effort to achieve submission or control, while Sarah was responding with techniques that suggested she was prepared to match whatever level of aggression he brought to the engagement. Peters whispered to his neighbor, "She is not just defending anymore. She is starting to attack." The observation was accurate. Sarah had shifted from reactive defense to proactive offense, using Martinez's aggressive approach against him while demonstrating techniques that required significant operational experience to execute effectively. The gymnasium atmosphere became charged with anticipation as everyone present realized they were about to witness something that would definitively resolve the question of relative capability and establish the hierarchy that would govern future interactions. The proving moment arrived with explosive intensity as Martinez launched his most aggressive attack yet, using his full weight and strength in an attempt to establish dominant position and restore his instructional credibility. His technique was sound, his commitment total, but he was about to discover the difference between training proficiency and operational experience. Sarah read his approach perfectly, her body positioning shifting microseconds before his commitment became irreversible. Instead of defending against his attack, she redirected his momentum while simultaneously executing a counter technique that demonstrated why Naval Special Warfare Development Group required additional screening beyond standard SEAL qualification. The result was devastating and immediate. Martinez found himself airborne, his 200-pound frame rotating through space with enough force that the impact echoed throughout the gymnasium when he hit the mat. The sound was followed by complete silence as 20 witnesses processed what they had just observed. But Sarah was not finished. Before Martinez could recover his position, she had transitioned to a submission hold that immobilized him completely while demonstrating control techniques that belonged in advanced tactical courses rather than basic training demonstrations. Her positioning was textbook perfect, her leverage absolute, her application of force precisely calibrated to achieve control without causing injury. Martinez attempted to escape using every technique in his considerable arsenal, but each effort only demonstrated more clearly that he was facing someone whose training and experience exceeded his own by a significant margin. His struggles became increasingly desperate as he realized that his strength advantage was irrelevant against someone who understood leverage and positioning at an expert level. Thompson stepped backward involuntarily. She just threw a 200-pound instructor across the room like he was weightless. Davidson shook his head in disbelief. That was not basic grappling. That was advanced combat techniques from someone with serious operational experience. Peters moved closer to the mat to confirm what he was seeing. Look at her positioning. She could break his arm if she wanted to, but she is maintaining control without causing damage. That level of precision requires extensive training. Williams approached the mat edge, his expression mixing professional assessment with genuine surprise at the demonstration of capability he was witnessing. The technical execution was flawless, but more importantly, it revealed training and experience that belonged in elite operational units rather than instructor positions. Rodriguez consulted his stopwatch, though timing had become irrelevant once the demonstration became a genuine contest of capability. "Sir, Martinez has been immobilized for over 30 seconds. Should we call the exercise complete?" Sarah maintained her submission hold while addressing Martinez directly. "Chief, do you concede the exercise, or would you like to continue?" Her voice was calm and controlled, showing no signs of exertion despite having just dominated a much larger and stronger opponent. The contrast between her apparent effort level and the result she had achieved was striking enough that several observers moved closer to confirm what they were seeing. Martinez struggled for several more seconds before accepting the inevitable. "Exercise complete. I concede." Sarah released the hold immediately and helped Martinez to his feet with the same professional courtesy she had demonstrated throughout her time at the facility. But the damage to assumptions and credibility was complete and irreversible. Clark turned to Thompson with questions that reflected everyone's confusion. "How do you train someone to move like that? She made it look effortless." The answer was becoming clear to everyone present. The level of technique and tactical awareness Sarah had demonstrated required years of training against expert opponents in high-stress operational environments. This was not the result of cross-training opportunities or weekend martial art classes. Williams stepped onto the mat to address both participants. Chun, that was an exceptional demonstration of advanced combatives techniques. Martinez, your technique was sound throughout the exercise. But the professional courtesy could not disguise what everyone had witnessed. Sarah had not just defeated an experienced instructor. She had dominated him so completely that the contest had never been in doubt once she decided to end it. Kowalski joined the group around the mat. Ma'am, those techniques suggest training and experience significantly beyond what would be available through standard SEAL qualification courses. Sarah helped Martinez adjust his uniform while responding to the observation. Advanced training opportunities are available for personnel assigned to specialized units. The response confirmed what everyone was beginning to understand. They were not just dealing with a qualified SEAL, they were dealing with someone whose training and experience placed her among the most elite operational personnel in the military. The gymnasium remained silent as the full implications of the demonstration process through 20 minds that were rapidly reassessing everything they thought they knew about capability, training, and the dangerous territory of making assumptions based on appearances. The immediate aftermath of Sarah's demonstration created a silence so complete that the gymnasium's ventilation system became the loudest sound in the room. 20 witnesses stood frozen in various states of shock, their minds struggling to process the gap between what they had expected and what they had just observed. Martinez slowly got to his feet, his professional composure intact, but his expression fundamentally changed. The casual confidence that had characterized his interactions with Sarah for 2 days had been replaced by something approaching reverence, mixed with embarrassment about his previous assumptions. Thompson was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. She threw him like he was a training dummy. Davidson nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the mat where the demonstration had concluded. 240 pounds of experienced instructor, and she controlled him like he was a beginner. Peter stepped closer to examine the mat surface, as if looking for evidence of what had just occurred. The technique she used to throw him, I have never seen anything like that outside of advanced tactical videos. Williams approached Martinez with professional concern masked as routine post-exercise evaluation. Chief, are you injured? Do you require medical attention? Martinez shook his head while testing his range of motion. No injury, sir. Just a comprehensive education about the difference between training proficiency and operational experience. The acknowledgement hung in the air like a confession. An instructor with 15 years of experience had just publicly admitted that he had been outclassed by someone he had spent 2 days offering basic guidance and modified training standards. Rodriguez consulted his notes with the kind of careful attention that suggested he was documenting something unprecedented. Sir, should this demonstration be included in the official training record? The question highlighted the broader implications of what had just occurred. Sarah's domination of Martinez would become part of the official record, documenting not just her capability, but also the spectacular failure of assumption-based evaluation methods. Clark turned to Thompson with a question that reflected everyone's confusion. If she has this level of training and experience, what is she doing here evaluating basic instruction methods? Sarah overheard the question and chose to address it directly. Advanced personnel periodically return to basic training environments to evaluate instruction quality and identify areas for improvement. The process helps ensure that training methods remain effective and free from bias. Kowalski stepped forward with his own observation. Ma'am, the techniques you demonstrated suggest operational experience in specialized units. How recently were you deployed? The question touched on information that might be classified, but Sarah's response was carefully measured. Recent enough that tactical applications remain current in my training repertoire. The implication was clear. They were dealing with someone whose combat experience was not just theoretical, but recent and operational. The techniques she had demonstrated were not learned in training facilities, but refined through actual mission requirements. Williams gathered the group for official conclusion of the exercise period. Today's demonstration has provided valuable insights into training methodology and evaluation procedures. All participants have contributed to program improvement objectives. But the professional language could not diminish the impact of what everyone had witnessed. Sarah had not just proven her capability, she had demonstrated a level of training and experience that placed her among the most elite operational personnel in the military. Davidson approached Martinez as the group began to disperse. "Chief, how do you process getting dominated like that by someone you were offering basic instruction to yesterday?" Martinez considered the question carefully. "You learn that assumptions are dangerous, and that appearance can be completely misleading about capability. Most importantly, you learn to evaluate people based on performance rather than preconceptions." Thompson joined the conversation. The betting, the comments about her washing out, the suggestions about alternative career paths. All of that was being documented by someone more qualified than any of us. Peters nodded grimly. "We spent 2 days demonstrating bias and poor judgment to someone who was qualified to evaluate our character and decision-making abilities. The professional implications are significant." Clark summed up what everyone was thinking. "We failed an evaluation we did not know we were taking, administered by someone we thought was unqualified to evaluate us." Sarah began collecting her equipment while the conversations continued around her. The demonstration had accomplished its purpose by definitively resolving questions about capability and establishing the actual hierarchy of training and experience. The gymnasium slowly emptied as participants processed the implications of the afternoon's events. Every assumption had been proven wrong, every dismissive comment had been revealed as bias, and every suggestion about modified standards had been exposed as condescending presumption. The transformation was complete. Sarah had evolved from apparent novice to recognized expert in the space of one decisive demonstration that would be remembered and discussed long after the evaluation period had concluded. 3 days later, the training compound had settled into a new rhythm that reflected fundamentally changed relationships and perspectives. Sarah's evaluation period had concluded, but her presence continued as she compiled final observations and recommendations for program improvement. The atmosphere had evolved from hostile skepticism to professional respect, mixed with ongoing embarrassment about initial assumptions. Lieutenant Commander Hayes called a final briefing to discuss evaluation findings and implementation of recommended changes. The assembled instructors and candidates filed into the conference room with the subdued attention of people who knew they were about to receive feedback about their documented behavior and decision-making processes. Sarah stood at the front of the room with a presentation folder that contained 2 weeks of detailed observations about bias patterns, assumption-based evaluation methods, and the impact of preconceptions on instruction quality. Her professional demeanor remained unchanged, but everyone present understood they were about to receive an assessment of their performance during the evaluation period. Hayes opened the session with acknowledgement of the unique circumstances. The evaluation period has provided valuable insights into training methodology and institutional culture. Chen will present findings and recommendations for program improvement. Sarah began her presentation with statistical analysis that was both comprehensive and diplomatically worded. Initial candidate and instructor reactions demonstrated significant reliance on appearance-based assumptions rather than performance-based evaluation. Modification suggestions were offered based on perceived limitations rather than demonstrated capabilities. Martinez shifted uncomfortably in his chair as the findings continued. Rodriguez consulted his notes with the kind of careful attention that suggested he was comparing official observations with his memory of specific comments and interactions. The presentation continued with specific examples that had been documented during the evaluation period, though names and identifying details were removed to maintain professional courtesy. Betting pools regarding candidate performance, suggestions for modified training standards, and assumptions about capability based on physical appearance were all included in the analysis. Williams raised his hand with a question that reflected everyone's concern. "Ma'am, Do these findings affect individual instructor evaluations or program standing? Sarah addressed the question with measured professionalism. The evaluation focuses on systemic patterns rather than individual performance. However, documented behaviors will inform future training programs designed to address bias recognition and elimination. Thompson leaned forward with his own concern. What happens to candidates who demonstrated poor judgment during the evaluation period? Does this affect our standing in the SEAL training program? The question struck at the heart of everyone's anxiety. They had spent 2 weeks demonstrating bias and making assumptions about someone more qualified than themselves, and those behaviors had been professionally documented and analyzed. Sarah consulted her presentation materials before responding. Candidate behavior during the evaluation period reflects normal human tendency toward assumption-based assessment. Recognition of these patterns represents the first step toward improved judgment and decision-making capabilities. Hay stepped forward to address implementation of recommended changes. Based on evaluation findings, we will implement new protocols for instructor training and candidate orientation. Emphasis will be placed on performance-based evaluation rather than appearance-based assumptions. Peters raised his hand with a broader question. Ma'am, will this evaluation methodology be used at other training facilities? Should we expect similar evaluations in future assignments? Sarah considered the question carefully. Effective evaluation techniques are often adopted across multiple training environments. Personnel should expect that assumption-based judgments will be tested and documented throughout their careers. The implication was clear. The days of casual dismissal based on appearance or preconceptions were ending, and future evaluations would likely include methods designed to reveal bias and poor judgment. Davidson asked the question everyone had been avoiding. Ma'am, how do we process the knowledge that we failed an evaluation we did not know we were taking? Sarah's response reflected both professional assessment and personal understanding. Recognition of bias represents growth opportunity rather than permanent failure. The ability to adjust behavior based on new information demonstrates professional development and improved judgment capabilities. Rodriguez stood to address the group as the briefing concluded. All personnel will receive additional training on bias recognition and performance-based evaluation methods. This evaluation has identified areas for improvement that will strengthen our overall training effectiveness. As the briefing ended and participants began filing out, the conversations reflected a mixture of embarrassment, professional growth, and grudging respect for the evaluation methodology that had revealed uncomfortable truths about assumption-based decision-making. Martinez approached Sarah as the room emptied. Ma'am, I want to acknowledge that this evaluation revealed biases I was not aware I possessed. The experience has been educational, if humbling. Sarah accepted the acknowledgement with professional courtesy. Recognition of bias patterns represents the first step toward eliminating them. Your willingness to acknowledge and address these issues demonstrates professional integrity. The final conversations reflected a fundamental shift in perspective that extended far beyond the evaluation period. Everyone involved had learned that assumptions about capability based on appearance were not just inaccurate, but professionally dangerous. Now I have to ask, what did you think about this story? Did it change how you view assumptions about people? Or have you seen situations where someone was underestimated based on their appearance? The lessons here apply far beyond military training, and I would love to know how this resonated with your own experiences.